What if a god, worshipped 4,000 years ago, were reborn into the world today? Have you ever thought a coincidence might actually be a sign? This question turned into a dangerous reality when a queen bee, at the center of the planet's most important genetic research, was claimed to be the reincarnation of an Egyptian goddess. In the heart of the Arizona desert, where the sun cracks the earth like pottery and the horizon trembles in a hot haze, there was an oasis of modern science, the Heston Apicultural Research Institute. From the outside, the structure, a series of low white geodesic domes, looked as if it had landed from another planet. Inside, a feverish battle was being waged against one of humanity's most urgent ecological crises: colony collapse disorder. The mysterious disappearance of bees, those industrious, indispensable pollinators, across the planet was a harbinger of a global agricultural catastrophe. And in the midst of this silent catastrophe, one man had lit a beacon of hope: Dr. Eamon Heston. Heston was not a typical scientist. In his 60s, with messy white hair and deep lines on his skin left by the Arizona sun, he was a man who felt more at home in the clothes of an explorer than in a lab coat. But what truly set him apart was his perspective on his subjects. He did not see bees as mere insects. He saw them as a single, living, breathing superorganism, a kind of living god where each individual worked for a greater intelligence. While his colleagues laughed at his spiritual approach, it was this very approach that had allowed him to achieve the impossible. Through years of patient genetic selection and an intuitive understanding, he had created a queen bee that seemed immune to all modern diseases and pesticides. He had named her after the ancient Egyptian goddess of weaving, wisdom, and creation, Neith. This queen, logged in the lab records as Neith 1, was not just an insect. She was a potential multi-billion-dollar genetic treasure and the key to the planet's agricultural future. One morning, one of the Institute's junior assistants entered the high-security, climate-controlled section where Neith 1 was housed and was met with an unusual silence. The room, which should have been filled with the soothing hum of thousands of bees, was as quiet as a tomb. And in the center of the room, the special bulletproof glass transport case that housed Neith 1 was gone. And so was Dr. Eamon Heston. When the alarm was raised, the facility was instantly put on lockdown. But this was not an external attack. There was no sign of forced entry on the security system. The locks had not been breached, the alarms had not been triggered. Heston and his queen had simply vanished from this fortress of steel and concrete, as if they were ghosts. They had left behind only two strange clues. In the exact center of the room, on the sterile white tiles of the floor, was a small pile of sweet, thick honey mixed with the sand of the Egyptian desert. And on top of that pile lay a single, delicate, celestial blue lotus petal. When the case was classified as the kidnapping of a priceless biological asset and its creator, it landed on the desk of Special Agent Eva Rostova of the FBI's Art Crime Unit. Rostova was a master at solving the complex and arrogant minds of art thieves and antiquity smugglers, and this case, at first glance, seemed similar to hers: a priceless artwork and the artist who held it. Upon arriving in Arizona, Rostova began her work with her usual methodical and pragmatic approach. For her, this was a simple equation. Either a rival biotech company had kidnapped Heston to steal his research, or a foreign government wanted this agricultural superweapon for itself. She saw the strange ritualistic clues left behind as a reflection of Heston's eccentric personality, or perhaps a false flag left to misdirect the investigation. "Sand, honey, and flowers," she said to the Institute's head of security. "These are not crime scene evidence. This is poetry." "We are not concerned with poetry, sir. I want a list of all the rival biotech companies Heston has met with in the last 6 months and the financial records of all personnel at this institute. Either money or power is behind this. It always is."
Rostova's investigation began with full professionalism and efficiency. financial analysts examined the stock market movements of Heston's rivals. Technical teams searched Heston's computers and servers for any trace of industrial espionage. Agents interrogated all of Heston's known colleagues and academic contacts. But as weeks passed, they failed to find a single concrete lead. No rival company had made any suspicious moves. There was no activity in the intelligence networks of any foreign government. No one had called with a ransom demand. And strangest of all, not a single cent had been touched in Heston's personal bank accounts. It was as if the man, along with his billion-dollar invention, had passed into a dimension that had nothing to do with money or power. The case had hit a wall, and on that wall, only those mocking, meaningless clues remained: honey, sand, and a blue flower. Rostova was struggling with a feeling she rarely experienced in her career: frustration. In desperation, she reluctantly changed the direction of the investigation. If she could not find the trail of the criminals, she decided to follow the trail of the victim's soul. She returned to Heston's Spartan house, where he lived a reclusive life with almost no personal belongings. But this time, she focused not on financial records or emails, but on the secret corners of his personality. And behind a closet in his bedroom, she discovered a locked door. When she opened the door, she found herself in Heston's secret sanctuary. This was the study not of a scientist, but of a mystic. The walls were covered with copies of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. On the shelves next to modern genetics textbooks were hundreds of old books on Egyptian gods, burial rituals, and mythology. And on the desk there was an altar dedicated to a single goddess, the bee-headed Neith, the goddess of creation and fate, holding a weaving shuttle in her hand. In that moment, Rostova understood that Dr. Heston was not just an entomologist. He was also a believer. And what he believed in was something the modern world had long forgotten. Deepening her investigation in this new direction, Rostova noticed a detail in Heston's financial records that everyone had overlooked. For years, Heston had been making large, anonymous donations to an obscure historical society called the Keepers of the Blue Lotus. This was the first concrete lead Rostova was looking for. When she traced the Keepers, the path led her to a massive, high-walled estate in a secluded, wealthy valley in California. This looked less like a historical society and more like the center of a luxury cult. When Rostova entered the estate with an official search warrant, she was not met with the fanatics or armed guards she expected. She was greeted by a group of wealthy and intellectual people who calmly introduced themselves as the Keepers. Their leader was a woman in her 50s with a captivating eloquence. "Welcome, Agent Rostova," the woman said with a calm smile. "We were expecting you." Rostova, trying to hide her surprise, asked them about Dr. Heston. "Dr. Heston was not kidnapped. He came with us of his own free will. He is not a victim. He is a high priest of our order." The leader took Rostova to a modern temple in the center of the estate, with a glass dome for a ceiling, filled with tropical plants and a lotus pond. And there she revealed the incredible truth of the story. They were a religious order that worshipped Neith, with roots dating back to ancient Egypt. And according to them, what Dr. Heston had created in his lab was not a scientific breakthrough. It was a divine event. The goddess Neith, with the planet's ecological balance in danger, had been reborn in the body of a queen bee to save her children, the bees, and consequently, humanity.
Dr. Heston was an instrument that witnessed the birth of the goddess, the leader said. and his duty was to bring the goddess back to the land where she belongs, to the banks of the sacred Nile River, which will restore her power and allow her to fulfill the prophecy. We did not kidnap him. We are accompanying him on a holy pilgrimage." Rostova could not believe what she was hearing. This was a moment when her rational world, her logic, and her laws had completely failed. Before her was not a kidnapped scientist. There was a high priest who had set out in pursuit of a 4,000-year-old prophecy of his own free will. Now Rostova was faced with the most impossible choice of her career. According to the law, there was no kidnapping. Dr. Heston, as an adult individual, was free to go wherever he wanted. But at the same time, she could not allow a multi-billion-dollar American scientific asset and a citizen to disappear into another country in the hands of a religious sect. This was a matter of national security. After countless tense phone calls with her superiors, Rostova decided to act on her own initiative. This was no longer a criminal case, it was a personal quest for understanding. She followed Heston and the keepers to Egypt. The trail led her to a newly excavated, previously unknown temple complex on the banks of the Nile River, far from the tourist routes. This was a forgotten temple dedicated to Neith, and in the heart of the temple, Rostova found Dr. Heston. Heston was not like a prisoner, he was like a king. He was wearing a white linen robe like that of the Egyptian priests, and on his face was an expression of absolute peace and determination she had never seen before. "I knew you would come, Eva," Heston said calmly. Rostova tried to persuade him to return. She spoke of science, of his responsibilities, of the law, but Heston was listening to her, but not hearing her. "You see science and faith as two different things," Heston said, "but I have come to understand that they are two sides of the same coin. My science brought me to this faith, and my faith guided my science. Neith One is not my creation. She chose to come into the world through me. She is the seed of a salvation, and this seed must be planted in this sacred land where it belongs." Heston led Rostova to a chamber in the center of the temple, with an open ceiling through which the stars could be seen. At that moment, a specific constellation had moved directly above the center of the room. It was the moment of celestial alignment. Heston opened the climate-controlled case he was holding. The queen bee, Neith One, and her small swarm of attendants buzzed out of the case as if awakening from a 1,000-year slumber. And the bees flew not towards the desert to die, but in the opposite direction, purposefully, towards the life-giving, lush green valley of the Nile River. Heston watched them go. On his face was the smile of a father watching his child's first step. "The prophecy is being fulfilled," he whispered. "The balance will be restored." He chose to stay behind, to spend the rest of his life as the guardian of that forgotten temple. Eva Rostova was left alone in the middle of the desert, with no crime to prosecute, no criminal to arrest. All she had was an experience that had shattered her black and white world forever. When she returned to Washington, she wrote in her report that Dr. Heston was alive and well, but had chosen to remain abroad of his own free will, and that the biological asset had been released into the wild as a result of an accident. Months later, on a spring day, Rostova was sitting on a park bench when she saw a bee land on a flower next to her. She paused for a moment, and as she looked at that small, industrious insect, she no longer saw just an insect. She saw something much more, something much older, much more mysterious. And she smiled. Sometimes science is not enough to solve the deepest mysteries. Sometimes one must simply believe. For more stories that explore how humanity's most ancient beliefs shape our modern world, don't forget to subscribe to Parallel Storylines. See you in the next case file.